morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Gains4Grains event, capitalizing on the pulse market. Speaking right now, my name is Kira Durston, and I am the Senior Market Development Agronomist for Cargill, based out of Congress, Moose Jaw, and Rowett. And also joining me today is Denise Gabriel.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right. So I'm Denise. My role is with the Market Sense team at Cargill. So I'm a grain marketing advisor, and I cover southern Saskatchewan. We've still got some spotty power here in Moose Jaw, so I do have my video running.
Okay, so today we'll be discussing some relevant information regarding risk management strategies when marketing and growing pulses. Please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to either ask them out loud, put your hand up on Teams. You'll just need to unmute yourself before you start talking because everybody is muted. Or you can also put them in the chat if you'd like, and we'll just answer them as best as we can as we see them. Okay, so for those of you who know me, I love talking about pulses, but pulses are kind of an interesting category because we grow many different types of pulses throughout Saskatchewan. Oh, Janina, we lost your presentation. Well, do we already have a question? Okay. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of different types of pulses out there. None of them are really grown the same. Therefore, the topic that I'll be covering today is something that affects all of our pulses and can affect our other crops as well. And that is fungicide management and reducing our likelihood of developing any sort of fungicide insensitivity in our crops. So, Janina, I actually can't see the presentation. So can you just, I guess, can someone just tell me? I'll just tell you when to switch the slides, I guess.
We can't see it, Kira.
Oh, you can't see it either?
Well, I think Janina might have disappeared on us.
Okay, because she's like, you're good. I was like, no, I can't see it still, but I thought it was a me thing.
There we go. It's back up.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just to start, as pulse growers, we have felt the sting of disease. There are many diseases that our pulses can get, and they can be quite devastating to our yields. These are some pictures of some of the diseases that we found in the fields this year, taken by myself, Kira, and my colleague Lilit out of Nicklin Siding Birch Hills. So featured in our pictures, we have Mycosphaeria in peas, Anthracnose in lentils, Ascochyta in chickpeas, and also Sclerotinia in lentils. Next slide, please. So in order to manage disease, we have tools that we can utilize. Some of these, oh, go ahead.
And your shirt.
Was there a question?
I'll mute people here in the background, Kira, and so I guess to the listeners, if you guys want to ask a question, just unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll keep going. So some of these tools can include crop rotation to allow the host residue and inoculum to break down. Minimum tillage farming can ensure that the pathogen won't survive as long when exposed to our brutal Saskatchewan elements. Seed quality can minimize seed to seedling transmission in some cases, or as also introduction of that pathogen into new fields that might not have already had it. As well as fungicide applications, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about for most of my segment today. Next slide. Okay, so to spray or not to spray, that is a typical question. And it can be a really difficult decision for growers to make. So to assist with that decision, SAS Pulse has released some handy evaluations that determine the economic efficiency of a fungicide application. So the intent of these evaluations is that a grower asks him or herself the questions and kind of rates their field around how much risk is associated with it. So if the risk level is above a certain threshold, then it's recommended to apply a fungicide. If it's not, it's recommended to complete the evaluation again every 3 to 5 days until the plant has completed flowering, just to make sure that, you know, crops are constantly, the state of them is constantly evolving throughout the season. So you just want to make sure that just because you decided to not spray a fungicide on that day, it could completely change 5 days later. So you just want to keep checking on that, or else it could get pretty bad. But these are really handy tools. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that they existed. And there's one for most of the most devastating diseases that our pulse crops can get. So you can find those on the Sask Pulse website as well. Any questions on those? Okay, so fungicide groups and how fungicides works. So fungicides are different cocktails of active ingredients, and all of these active ingredients are different according to how they prevent fungal growth, and this is also referred to as mode of action. So for example, will that active ingredient stop energy production, or will it prevent cell division? Like, how is it going to make sure that that pathogen isn't going to continue through that plant? So these groupings are, and then what happens is groupings are formed based on similar mode of action and chemical groups, and then each group has a code. So you'll see this very similar to how herbicides have groups and numbers. For example, like a group 2 herbicide, or group 1 graminicide, or things like that. Next slide, please. Did it change?
It did, yeah.
Okay, so where you can find these fungicide groups, so you can find what groups your fungicides are pretty easily. You can look in the crop protection guide or on the tech sheets that chemical companies will hand out. In the crop protection guide, it's pretty cool because you can also see how each of the groups work, if any of you are interested in kind of like how the groupings are made. And so, yeah, that's where you'll find what groups are in each fungicide. Next slide, please. Okay, so which leads me to my main point, and that is fungicide insensitivity. And so fungicide insensitivity is the loss of efficacy of a fungicide, and that occurs just from the natural evolution and the natural diversity within a pathogen's population. So if in any population there is naturally occurring genetic diversity, and when we repeatedly use the same fungicide, it places a lot of selection pressure on those naturally occurring resistant populations. So for example, if your field has a large population of fungicide or of pathogen A, and then you spray, but it also has a little bit of pathogen B, and you spray a fungicide that covers pathogen A, well, that pathogen B is still going to be there, and it's going to reproduce, and it's going to thrive, and the population of that is going to get bigger. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of covering all your bases, I guess. And we'll kind of talk about how you make sure that you're not seeing this insensitivity, but it's something that develops from repeated use of the same fungicide, and it's something that happens naturally. So it's just something that we kind of need to know about, and we kind of need to adapt our practices just based on that. It's not really a man-made problem as much as pathogens want to survive. They're all going to be a little bit different. And so our fungicides aren't necessarily going to be effective on all of them. So we want to make sure we're kind of doing what we can to make sure that the entire population is wiped out, as opposed to just leaving one left over to thrive. The other thing is you might see fungicide insensitivity referred to as resistance as well, but a lot of professionals refer to it as insensitivity, because it can often get confused because we breed resistance to disease into our varietal genetics. And so it can be kind of confusing to use resistance in both scenarios. So we've started using like a pathogen is insensitive to a fungicide, whereas we might be breeding resistance in our variety to a pathogen, if that makes sense. Does anybody have questions on this? Should I kind of talk about it a little bit further? Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. So just to give some relevant examples of fungicide insensitivity that we currently face in Saskatchewan, in 2003, we found group 11 insensitive ascochyta in chickpeas. And since then, that has become a large majority of our ascochyta population. So it's pretty safe to assume that all ascochyta in chickpeas is group 11 insensitive. In 2010, we found group 11 insensitive Mycosphaeria blight in peas. And then in 2019, most recently, we found group 11 insensitive Anthracnose in lentils. So for the insensitive Anthracnose in lentils, we're not entirely sure how widespread it is at this time. It's kind of a new thing that just came into light at kind of in the winter planning of 2020, I guess. So we're not entirely sure where that one is. The group 11 insensitive Mycosphaeria blight in peas is fairly small, but it's a little bit more significant in, say, Alberta. And the ascochyta in chickpeas is pretty well spread throughout Saskatchewan. Any questions on that?
Kira, can you talk about how we found out that there was insensitivity? Like, what did it take for us to realize something was going on?
So pretty much, we figured out that there was insensitivity because some farmers were complaining that their fungicides weren't really working. And when the chem company kind of went out and evaluated, like, okay, should the fungicide have worked? What kind of conditions was it? And then they also went and took samples as well of the anthracnose within the crop. And they sent it to a lab and they found out that it was insensitive. But within anthracnose too, there's two different races that we know of. And so it's not really resistant across all of the races so far. It's not really well known what we're kind of facing at this time. But that's how we figured out that there was insensitivity, was the farmer had done everything right. So we brought out the chem, it wasn't me specifically, but the chem company was brought out. They sent the samples to the lab and it came back insensitive to the fungicide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, another question. So
Yeah.
do you wait till you have a problem, or should you be automatically rotating these groups?
It's always kind of better to be proactive about it, I would say. I'll kind of give some tips in the next slide on how you can reduce your risk of developing the fungicide insensitivity. So obviously you don't want to wait until you have a problem. So I would definitely say take a proactive approach about it. And just make sure that you're out there scouting your fields to make sure that your fungicides are working as they should be. Does that answer your question? I'll maybe just go through these different things that you can do, and then if there's still more questions after, we can answer them. So to reduce your risk of developing fungicide insensitivity, you want to tackle disease using an integrated approach, which kind of places less reliance on our fungicides to do all the heavy lifting. So like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you're doing a proper crop rotation and managing your residue really well. When there's the option, try and grow resistant varieties and make sure that you're kind of using new seed every so often. You want to make sure you're using good seed quality and you're also using those risk assessment tools when you are thinking about applying a fungicide, because it's not really recommended to apply a fungicide just for like a plant health benefit. So you want to make sure that the risk is there to use the fungicide as well. You also want to make sure that you're setting your fungicide application up for success. And that includes using proper rates, no cut rates, because that kind of gives it a sublethal dose. So you're more likely to have populations kind of get through it. And then you're going to have a higher population of that pathogen that got through it. You want to use the proper water volumes. I know it's terrible and it seems unrealistic and not necessary in some situations, but those water volumes have been set based on how well the fungicide is going to work. So the more water that you're going to put down, the better that the fungicide is going to work. So it's really recommended. if you want to see your fungicide work as best as it possibly can, that you use those proper water volumes. And also just following the label instructions, making sure that you're spraying in appropriate weather conditions, things like that. The other thing is you want to be aware of your fungicide groups and rotate them. And the fungicides do have different levels of risk within themselves according to how they work and how easy it would be for a pathogen to develop insensitivities to it. This risk level is determined by a group called the Fungicide Resistance Action Committee, or FRAC. And this can also be found in the crop protection guide as well. So based on the risk of developing insensitivity to it, you want to make sure that, for example, if you're spraying a fungicide that's rated as a high risk, that you're kind of making sure that that's mixed with something else. You're not spraying just that straight group, and that you're kind of minimizing the application to, you know, the set amount that you're allowed to have. Like, for example, 2 apps per season, or they'll all be different according to that. But you'll want to pay attention to that to make sure that you're not spraying fungicides that are rated as really high risk of developing insensitivity just straight by itself. You want to make sure you'll tank mix that. Very similar to a herbicide.
Kira, we had a question here in the text box from Blair.
Okay.
He is asking, what are the group 11 fungicides? So maybe do you want to comment on what some of the common ones are?
Yeah, so actually, Janita, can you go to the next slide and we'll see if we can read it good enough. Group 11s are often referred to as strobies. Sorry, that slide is very, very tiny, but they're referred to as strobies or strobilurins. So most of our fungicides have group 11s in them because they are really fantastic fungicides. It's just they are used so widely, and it's pretty easy to develop resistance to them with just a quick little change in their genetic code. And so those ones are rated as high risk. So things like Diax, Elatus, Delaro, all of those have group 11s in them. But there's also other things in them as well. So not only is it important to know what groups are in your fungicides, but you should also know if all of those groups are effective on the disease that you're most concerned about. So that's where it kind of gets a little bit difficult to find the information. But if you ask your Cargill or your specific chem company rep, or Sask Pulse has kind of pulled together these little summary tables, as you can see, so it'll say, okay, so it has this group in it and this group in it. And then in some of them, they'll also say, like in the column, it says non-group 11 component registered for control of anthracnose. That's when you'll see, okay, so the group 11 is registered for anthracnose, and also its partner is also registered for control of anthracnose. So that's kind of what you'll want to start to know, just so that you're not placing that heavy reliance on the group 11. Otherwise, it's the exact same as kind of spraying a straight group 11, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? Okay, so yeah, for all of the insensitive diseases that we have, for the most part, Sask Pulse has released a guide like this. So for Ascochyta and chickpeas, they have one like this, and Anthracnose in lentils, they have one like this. So I would really recommend you guys taking a look at those charts and making sure that your fungicides that you're kind of planning for this winter are going to be effective in the event that your population is resistant as well. Any other questions? Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. So like we talked about, if you suspect that you do have fungicide insensitivity, so we would say scout your fungicide efficacy, which we should be doing anyways. I know it's pretty busy, but making sure that your fungicide worked within that 10 to 14 day window that it's supposed to work. And if you suspect that it didn't work, say you have some pockets where the disease pressure was really high or things like that, what I would say is maybe contact like your retail and ask them to come out and look at it as well. And then maybe pull in the chem companies, see if maybe there was something that happened, that maybe it was really humid that day or something. But also, the only way to really confirm fungicide insensitivity in the field is through lab or DNA-based testing. So pretty much you're going to have to send a sample away, and it's going to be a lot of history. Like they're going to probably ask you, okay, so what fungicide was sprayed on it this year and maybe last year? When was the last time you had lentils on it? Those kinds of questions, just to confirm, like if it does come back positive for fungicide insensitivity, they'll also use that information to confirm it as well. And there's the number that you can call if you do suspect you have insensitivity, and they'll kind of direct you as to what lab to send it to, those kinds of things. I haven't had to really do that yet. I worked with Michelle Hubbard this past year collecting samples of Anthracnose, and then I just kind of sent it to her lab, but I haven't kind of done it on my own yet. So and
Kira, there's a question. Is it possible to develop insensitivity if you have good crop rotation?
I would say there's a lot of different factors that go into disease, and that's kind of referred to as the disease triangle. So if you have good crop rotation, that's an excellent first step at minimizing your chances of developing it, because you're not having that prolonged exposure of residue. You're not seeing that high level of inoculum as much. I would say that you probably still could develop some insensitivity just based off of it could blow in from somebody else's yard and things like that. So I would say just continue scouting for it, being aware of it, making sure that you're not spraying that straight group 11 or one of those high risk groups, and just using all of the tools that you possibly have to make sure that you're kind of tackling it like that. But that is definitely the first step at that integrated approach to minimize your risk of having it.
Chris, it looks like you have your hand up. Do you have a question for her?
Yes, Kira. How can we tell if it's insensitivity or just suppression on a disease?
So that will be kind of like based on the rating too on the fungicide. Like if it's rated for suppression, there's a certain percentage that it should work. It's hard to tell if it was just the fungicide not working because the population is insensitive, or because the fungicide just literally didn't work in that patch. And so that's where that lab testing and that DNA analysis really comes into play, because you wouldn't be able to tell in the field if it was because your fungicide didn't work because of the fungicide, or because of the weather, or if because the pathogen is resistant to it. So that's when it becomes you have to take samples of that tissue and send it to a lab. And what they'll do is they'll plate it and they'll test it to see if it is. So if you are noticing that your fungicide isn't working on your field, it's good to let somebody know.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? If you just want to go to the next slide, Janina, I'll just finish up. So for more information, SAS Pulse really does have a lot of good documents out regarding the fungicide insensitivity in pulses. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. And also, if you're curious on how insensitivity really develops within a population, or any information on the fungicide groups and how their risk is developed, I would encourage you guys to check out the Fungicide Resistance Action Committee website, because they have a ton of good information on there that's to many different levels of what you want to get. So they have pretty basic information up to quite scientific information. So that's a really good resource as well. And also, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, feel free to contact me. I love talking about pulses, like I said. So yeah, and that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Kira. So Kira did a good job there of talking us through how we can help manage the pulse risk. Marketing pulses, you all would know, is a little trickier. So what I want to do a little bit today is talk about market sense in the respect of how can we market other crops differently to give us more flexibility with our pulses. So again, my name was Denise. Just like you have been, feel free to put up your hand or use the chat box or come off mute and interrupt to ask some questions. And we'll try and pause throughout the thing to give you some space to ask those questions as well. So Market Sense is an advisory program. Basically, we are looking at advisory and a grain marketing plan as saying, you know, to be successful, you need a stool that's got 3 solid legs on the ground. And those legs, if we just follow the diagram from the left top, it's really about the individual situation on your farm. So how do we understand what you need for cash flow, bin space movement, picking up bags in the fall, some timing of that. What does it cost you to actually put the crop in the ground, and where are your break evens? So what are your profit levels? Bottom left-hand corner, the other leg of the stool, is really important to understand market direction, right? So what's going on with the oilseeds markets? You can get a better call on canola decisions, which may give you more flexibility for your pulses. On the right-hand side, bottom, risk management tools. So Cargill itself has about 14 different ways you can market your grain. And I would venture a guess most of you on the line probably could name about 5 or 6. So there is a tool for every single market condition and every single market bias. And that's really important as we're making our decisions. Are we taking risk off with the right tools? And then we say that myself and my fellow teammates are the top of the stool, the part you're going to sit on. We call ourselves the advisor support. And what that really means is that we're bringing these 3 legs together and keeping it stable and saying, okay, well, you know, we think this is going on in the market conditions, and we think this would be the right tool to use because we're trying to achieve this individual situation for your farm. So that's kind of where I come in, and the expertise that I'm bringing to this presentation today is just to talk through what we can do to market differently. So basically, when you look at your pulse crops, you know, I'm thinking lentils and chickpeas and peas, you only get one opportunity to make that pricing decision for each sale. And so you might pre-season go and use your active God contracts, so you have your production risk covered. Others might try and time the market once you've got it in the bin, just so you're a little bit more secure. But my question would be, do you ever feel like you end up having to sell to get that cash flow or the bin space needs when you'd rather just be holding your grain? Go. So how do we optimize bin space and our cash flow plan? Basically, what I would propose is that we're going to try and do more with our hedgeable crops. So that's your canola, your wheat, your soybeans. We can get into some things with oats as well. So basically, there are tools that can help us manage risk and retain our upside in the markets. So what that means to you really at a basic level is you're going to book your deliveries. You're going to secure your cash flow so you can work with the bank and know when money's coming in. You can even work with the bank and say, I know that my profit on that sale is going to be X or Y. So then you can maybe make some decisions about other financing choices. And then it allows us more flexibility with that when and how we want to sell the pulse crops that we've got coming in from harvest or that are already in the bin. So I'm going to talk about 2 tools today. I've picked these 2 because I think one fits really well for looking at new crop pricing options, and I've picked the other one because it was a really nice fit as we've been going through this canola rally. And if the rally is still going, it will continue to be a good fit. So we will talk through those 2 specifically. So go ahead, Janina. So the first one I want to talk about is managing our risk, and we're going to use a minimum price put contract to do that. So a minimum price put contract has a few benefits to you guys. One of the most important, I think, is that it secures your delivery period. So if you're sitting here today looking at new crop canola futures or new crop wheat futures, and you're like, well, you know, I do want some early movement. I'm not sure if they're going higher. Maybe part of your decision process, though, is that you want to get that space booked into the elevator because you know that you need to move some grain off the combine. It's going to avoid production risk. So when we use a minimum price put contract, specifically we refer to it as a PPA, priced prior to arrival. That contract means we don't lock in our futures and we don't typically lock in your basis. So practically to you, what that means is it's sort of like an act of God contract on your pulses. If you didn't produce that bushel of grain, you wouldn't have a basis or a futures to cancel. You would still have the cost of the put, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how that works and why. So there would be a bit of an expense associated with it, but you don't have to worry about buying out of a contract because the market's gone a lot higher. We're in the middle of a severe drought, that sort of thing. The third benefit is that you know you're profitable with that sale. So you can actually look at what are today's costs to grow your grain, and then how would that pencil in for profit for you. And last, and based on the crop year we just went through, or the selling year we've had so far, this contract lets you have your upside. So, you know, if canola was at 500 earlier this summer and fall, and you were like, oh, I'm going to sell for summertime movement, you know, now you're sitting here looking at it going like, oh, well, the market's, you know, $150 better. If you would use something like a minimum price put, you actually haven't priced your futures yet on your contract. So you're participating and can sell at $650 futures. So it's got a really nice feature when we get into these markets. So when I talk about minimum price puts, one of the best analogies I have is it's like fire insurance for your house. So if you think about why you pay insurance, you're going to buy insurance on your house just because what if there is a fire? And if that happens and your house burns to the ground, you're going to call your insurance broker, you're going to activate your insurance, they're going to build your house back to the value you assigned to it when you purchased your insurance. Ideally, the house doesn't burn down. You don't have to deal with that problem this year. And, you know, maybe in a year you decide to sell the house, and your hope is that the market is appreciated from the time you bought the house. This minimum price put is the exact same concept. So if the market burns to the ground, so new crop canola, we're looking at 550 today. You know, if it fell to 480, we would go and say, I want to use the insurance. I want to use my minimum price put. I want you to value canola at 550 again because I paid the insurance to do that. If we ideally, though, don't have the market burn to the ground, what we want to do is have the canola market continue to appreciate. Maybe November 2021 canola futures go from 550 up to 625. Well, now I want to price my canola futures because they're at a higher value than when I could have sold it, you know, 5 months ago. So that's what the put is allowing us to do. It's protecting a good value today, but hopefully the market appreciates and we don't have a disaster and we get to sell later into a better market. So what I think is when I look at these minimum price puts on your hedgeable sales, it's really giving you more of a plan for your space and your cash needs, but it's keeping back the flexibility. And by flexibility, I mean flexibility, those prices could still be on the rise on the hedgeable crops, but also that maybe we just don't want to sell those pulses as early as we traditionally have. So maybe it allows you to do more harvest movement on your wheat and your canola because you can wait and see how the prices are, know your worst case price, and that way you don't need to sell so many pulses right off the combine. Maybe you can move those out into a different period and catch some appreciation later in the year. Now, my very first slide there, it kind of comes back to that individual situation. You know, what do we have for bin space? And is that going to meet our cash needs? But that's the sort of thing we need to assess, sort of farm by farm. Go ahead, Janina. So the second tool, maybe I'll stop there for a second. Do you guys have questions about minimum price puts? I don't know if it'd be if you've seen me speak before, I've probably talked about them. I'm pretty passionate about that tool, but some of you, it might be a new concept. Okay, well, we'll keep going. If you guys think of something, just put your hand up or put it in the text box and somebody will tell me what you've asked. So the second tool I want to talk about today is more of a fit for the market we've just been through. So the market was on a real rise. How could we have been positioned with a tool that would help us capture some of that appreciation? And this is a tool that would retain upside, and it's called a minimum price call. So very similar name to the one prior. So minimum price call, again, has some of those similar benefits to a put. You'll see a lot of similarities. Basically, it's going to secure our delivery period. What's nice about the call is we are going to, when we haul it, we're going to get paid the total of our contract price less the value we spent on the call. So we can plan our cash flow really exactly. We're going to know that that cash flow that we've chosen or that contract price for a minimum is profitable on our farm. And most excitingly, we retain the upside if we're bullish on these markets. So in this one, a minimum price call is a little different. You know, I didn't use the image of the house burning down, but basically what we're trying to do here is participate when the market is on the rise. So you're going to sell your grain, you're going to make an investment to be bullish. And what I think is really key to understand is you can be bullish in different time delivery window, not delivery, sorry, just a different time window than your delivery. So what I mean by that is you could haul and sell canola for harvest time. And you could say, well, you know, this is great, but I think that by summertime, canola is going to be worth more. And so you could use the tool to position yourself against the summertime prices of canola, assuming that between harvest and summer, they're going to be on the rise, and this tool would let you capture that gain. So basically, you know, your benefits is that you're going to haul your harvest movement, you're going to get paid for it. You're going to purchase a minimum price call, and in this example, I'm saying the July futures because those would time with summer. So then if the market rises above where we're at, we're going to earn the additional value. So it's going to enhance our sales price. So in terms of benefits, again, your upfront check, all it's going to have is the value that you contracted your grain less the cost of the call, which is going to be a really small percent. Today you're looking, you could probably spend about $30 over a $550 futures. You could probably even bring that down to closer to 20 depending on what you wanted to buy. Because similar to your house insurance, you get to pull the levers. You know, how fancy of a house are you insuring? So this is the same way with puts and calls. How high of a strike price are we protecting? But if you said you spent $20 on a tool and the futures are $550 on new crop, that's about 4% of the cost, right? So it's a little piece of the pie that you're investing. Go ahead, Janina. So I wanted to just show you how similar it is to the prior one. So when you think about a minimum price call and using it on a hedgeable sale, it's going to let us plan our space and our cash again, but we still have that flexibility. So that flexibility that those hedgeable crops pricing might be on the rise still. But again, giving us more flexibility with that pulse crop, right? So how can we do something different that gives us more flexibility? And in some years, that flexibility might be still that you want to sell more pulses off the combine, but there's going to be times and years where you actually want to let them appreciate in the bin before you move them. And so this is a way to have more control of that decision. So maybe before I speak to this side, are there any questions about minimum price calls? I'd throw out there, we refer to them at Cargill as minimum price calls or minimum price puts, because when you decide to do them right away, we know the worst case scenario, what that would look like in terms of money to you. So that's a really nice thing in terms of being able to plan with your banks, you know, how much income is going to come in on these months, how does that let you do other things in terms of financing, so they can be a really nice fit. Okay, well, we'll jump to the next slide. You know, I kept mine pretty high level. I would encourage you guys, if you have questions, reach out to your grain rep that invited you. I'll go to a slide here in a little bit where Kira and my information's on the main screen, so you can write it down. I see we got a question. Can you price out of the market? So if I'm understanding your question, like the market sitting today, new crop at 550, could you pick a different value to buy your tool at? And you absolutely can. We call that the strike price. And so you could say, I want to say if the market's above 530, or if you could say, I want to watch the market move to 570 before I participate. Those sorts of changes are what's going to change the cost structure, similar to the house insurance. Are you insuring a house with granite countertops or just laminate? So we get to make some of those choices, and as we make those choices, it'll change the cost structure. Did that help?
Denise, if you we're talking about pulses here today, and the trick is that we we can't use any of these tools directly on pulses. So which commodities would you recommend if a farmer wanted to protect his pulse tonnage? Which commodity would you suggest they hedge against to protect their pulse tons?
So it's not that the commodity we use is going to be correlated to what the pulse market is doing. So it's not necessarily hedging it against that or protecting against the pulse. It really depends on your crop mix. I mean, down south, we don't tend to have as much wheat. We're doing more durum. Durum and lentils, both of those would be non-hedgeable. So then we're probably dealing mostly with the canola. As you push more north, you guys are going to have more wheat in the rotation. So spring wheat, even if we're getting into CPSs, winter wheat, we have these opportunities. So I guess I'd just leave you guys with a couple thoughts. You heard Kira speak there about watching how fungicide is acting in your pulse crops. But think about your ability to maximize that crop potential in terms of quality and yield. She's going to have her number here up on the phone screen again shortly, so you can see what, reach out to her, reach out to your reps with some conversation. And then I would challenge you to just think about how you can do some things differently on your farm. And your local grain rep knows about these tools that I've just talked about. And on the screen there, you can see both Kira and my contact information. If you have some desire to reach out to us directly, we both love talking about what's going on in Saskatchewan. Yeah, one more question here. Sorry, I just couldn't see the whole question. I got to flip screens. Maybe if you can see it, Tracy.
Sure. So Yuri is asking, can you please give an example of what delivery months we can do on new crop canola and wheat utilizing the minimum price put, and how much time we have to make a decision on basis?
Great. Yeah, that's a really good example. So what we do is we would pick the delivery period that works for your farm in those cases. So if you like to haul your wheat in September, we can contract it so your delivery period reads September, and then each delivery month always has a corresponding futures month. So for wheat, for example, September would mean you're using December futures on your tools. Canola, if you wanted to haul maybe a little bit later, you're going to throw it in the bin for a bit and you're like, I just want to haul when things are not so busy at my place. I'm going to haul in December. That would be tied to a January futures month. So that decision then would determine what tool we're using on our contract, or what futures month our tool is using, I should say. And those futures months always have expiry dates. So if you had a tool running on the November futures for canola, they're going to expire around October 25th. We give you exact dates when you enter into those tools. Wheat being on December, you'd have that tool till around November 25th. The basis decision is a little bit different. And so if you have a PPA contract priced prior to arrival, or you have a futures first contract with Cargill, you always need your basis 30 days before you can deliver. So if you had picked September delivery for your wheat, you really need to have your basis locked in by July 31st. And the same with your canola in my example, if it wanted to move in December, you're going to need your canola basis by October 31st. Now, doing an October 31st canola basis is probably not likely to be the best basis available, just because you're getting into that time of year where it's harvest pressure. So you probably do want to book some of those things more proactively than the last day.
Do you see the question, Denise, or you want me to read it too?
No, I can see this one. So can we use other futures months other than what the contract is tied to? Great question. So yes. So for example, if you were delivering in the fall, let's use canola. So delivering in the fall, it's going to be on the November futures. You could take a tool that's bullish a different futures month. So you could say, I'm looking to have a call that's running against the July futures because I believe in that canola is usually worth more in the summer. So yes, you can absolutely change your futures month and have a different position on.
Denise, I know this isn't really a market outlook session on pulses, but I did get a text question to come through just asking a little bit of your opinion around the pulse market going into new crop. What are some of the bearish and bullish factors you're watching? and specifically maybe add some commentary on the tariffs that are happening globally and how you feel that's going to shape up for us.
Well, I think we've had a good indicator here in the last 2 weeks. India did renew their tariff at 30% on Canada for lentils. And since then, you have probably noticed the lentil prices come back up. So a little more excitement coming to the table. This is typically the time of year where lentils are a little more exciting. You know, it's crop production week. You would generally have more new crop bids come to the table this week. And I think we're seeing that, right? And we were going through a bit of a lull there. You know, Australia had just harvested. Canadian dollar has been working against us. It's, you know, in the last 8 months, it's been very strong, gaining 10 cents. Other challenges that are happening in the system right now that's causing some headwinds to the pulses is the shortage of containers to ship in. So some of you may have heard that news story, but basically China has the ability now to ship out commercial goods, and what they're doing is moving them out of their country in containers. But then they're incenting the countries to ship those containers back to them empty so they can reload them and ship them out again. And that's creating just some challenges for your local pulse processing plants or specialty crop markets where they just would typically ship by containers. They're having trouble putting their hands on the container to ship with. So, you know, that sort of stuff is causing some delays in pulse pricing. Ramadan this year over in those Muslim countries starts on April 11th, I believe is the date, and it runs for a month. So we generally start to see some interest pick up. Prior to that, it takes about 40 days for our product to ship across to that part of the world. So I think you'll start to see a little more pulse interest, you know, in the next 6 weeks, them wanting to get it shipped and into their system by March so they can get it across the sea and timing it for April. So I am optimistic we're going to see a little bit more, you know, just funkiness in those lentil bids and even pea bids in the next few months. I am a little more cautious about chickpeas. A couple years ago, we really flooded the market. We put in so many acres and had some decent production. So when you look at the supply and demand picture for chickpeas, we really have a glut that we need to work our way through. And that's probably going to take a couple more years of acre being in check, depending on how yield and quality goes. But just our normal demand sort of drawing down that stockpile. So I'm optimistic, pulses. I've cooled my jets a little bit. You talked to me 6 months ago, I would have been really excited about our potentials. And I would have been telling you, you know, things like I thought red lentils were going to 34 cents. You know, now I'm a little more cautious because I think we've got a few challenges in our works in terms of the strength of the Canadian dollar and some of those shipping challenges. But I do think they're coming up. So patience is going to be a little bit of a virtue here if you've been managing to wait so far. I think if you can wait a couple weeks longer, hopefully this current bids, like I've been hearing red lentils in the 27 and a half range. I think they're going to continue to push up a little bit. 30 is going to be a big headwind on the reds. So that's another thing to think about too. You know, do you need to get some movement out of them, or can you afford to see if it can push through that?
Awesome. Thanks, Denise. I got another text question here.
Sure.
This one's for Kira. So, Kira, can you come back on? So the question is, if I'm a grower who is concerned about potentially having some insensitivity in my area, specifically anthracnose, but in general insensitivity in my area, I guess what are some of the products you would recommend just to ensure that I don't end up having those same issues in my fields if I think some of my neighbors might have it? And I guess lentils are probably most top of mind, but sorry.
Yeah. So there are 2 products on the market right now that are registered for like non-group 11 components to have activity on anthracnose. And I believe that's Elatis. And also I think Cotigra just got registered as well. Yeah. So I've seen really good results from Elatis on anthracnose. So I like that one. And I also saw really good results with Cotigra as well. So either of those products have less reliance on the group 11.
The other question, Kira, that came through is how widespread do we think this insensitivity in lentils is so far? And is there specific geographies in Western Canada that need to be more alert to checking for insensitivity?
Yeah, I can't really comment on how widespread it is because it's really not well understood. They're working on trying to figure out where it all is, with a lot of different agronomists sending in samples just from their area. But with COVID and stuff, that process has really been slowed down because a lot of the labs are closed. That being said, I expect that we should have within the next 1 to 2 years, I guess, better understanding on where all of this insensitivity is located and kind of how severe it is as well. Just because you have insensitivity in a field doesn't mean that your entire field is going to be full of an insensitive population. You will still have sensitive pathogens in there, and you'll also have insensitive pathogens. So the trick is to just make sure that that insensitive population doesn't overrun your entire field. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I think that was it. I think you answered it.
How widespread it is?
Yeah, but I think you answered that. Not quite sure yet.
There's a couple more text questions for you, Kira, too. So with moisture levels continuing to be variable and focus on disease and pulses, is there a preferred pulse or legume to grow if you need such in your rotation?
I would say that, you know, it's good to kind of have a combination of different pulses just based on what pulses you can grow in your area. I like incorporating like 2 different types of pulses in our rotation. So for example, chickpeas and lentils, and then using that as a rotation just to handle, like, say, for example, Aphanomyces. With diseases like Anthracnose and lentils, for the most part, you can get a handle on those with like a 3 to 4 year rotation. 4 year is the optimal, just how quick the lentil residue will break down. I would say that root rot is probably the biggest one that you'll have to manage with a lengthy crop rotation. And the other thing is, I would say that really focus on the genetics of your pulses. And for example, if you're noticing that you just really can't get a handle on disease and you're really struggling with it, I would say it might be time to start looking at changing your variety, or at least updating your seed, because that I see that really commonly where even it didn't matter what fungicide we sprayed, we were seeing really bad anthracnose, for example, in lentils. And then once we changed the variety, there was a big difference in that, just making sure that we had new genetics in there, new resistance. And so I would say watch your varieties. If you are having issues with root rots, you'll probably want to incorporate 2 different types of pulses in your rotation. Yeah, Ames, did that kind of answer that question? Okay. Aphanomyces in peas. Gord, what do you want to know about it?
Hi, Kira. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just wanted some comments on peas. We're seeing a high incidence of increased Aphanomyces in peas, and just kind of wanted to get a broad perspective of what you've been seeing, and maybe what others have been seeing in Aphanomyces across the province.
Yeah, Aphanomyces is a pretty nasty one because it's really difficult to, number one, predict how severe it's going to be in that field. And we don't really have a lot of tools that we can use in regards to chemicals. There are seed treatments that are registered for suppression of Aphanomyces. And I would say look at that option as a tool to minimize the amount of inoculum in your field. I would not say that that is a silver bullet for Aphanomyces at all. The other thing I would say, like, if you are getting enough moisture for Aphanomyces, it can kind of come in, go like in the middle of the season as well. So I would say a lengthier rotation is probably your best bet when it comes to that. Try and avoid putting peas on fields that you know have had bad Aphanomyces in the past, and try to, and I know it sucks, but you're going to have to do that really like 8 to 10 year rotation as well. But yeah, I mean, could you put in some soybeans maybe, or chickpeas in some areas? I know Katie made a really good video on Aphanomyces that's on Twitter right now, and I'm not sure if Katie's on the call, but maybe she could comment for up north.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw tons of Aphanomyces up here. I kind of cover the area from sort of around Unity and North Battleford, and a bit north of North Battleford. So we saw a lot of Aphanomyces this year. I think Kara did a really good job of kind of summing it up. Like, the rotation is critically important and unfortunately really the only tool that we have right now. There is some preliminary research into how fertilizer rates might affect a plant's ability to cope with Aphanomyces, but that's all in pretty early stages. And, you know, I've heard some anecdotal information, but it's not really at a point yet where we can sort of hang our hat on it and say, yes, this is a factor that affects it. So yeah, so they're kind of looking into that. I would definitely say, you know, keeping sort of track of which fields have had peas in them in a bad Aphanomyces year. For example, the fields that had peas maybe last year, where we saw some Aphanomyces pressure, but nothing compared to this year, just primarily as a function of how much rain we got. The fields that had peas last year, if you didn't see severe Aphanomyces pressure in them, you're probably okay to go back in, you know, in a shorter than 8 to 6 year period, assuming that when you go back in there, we don't get a really heavy amount of rain. I would say that any fields that have had peas in a really bad Aphanomyces year, so any fields that had peas this year, I would definitely give them that full 6 to 8 year season. I actually was talking to another agronomist in my area who had a really interesting observation that there was a field that had been seeded to peas in, I think it was 2016, anyway, one of the last really wet years. And in that year, there was a slough, so it didn't get seeded to peas. They seeded around the slough, obviously. Well, this year it was back in peas and had a really extreme Aphanomyces infection. But the part that was a slough the year before, the peas were healthy and stood up really tall there. So just missing that one bad infection year meant that the peas this year were a lot healthier in that small part of the field. The rest of the field was a wreck, but we thought it was really interesting how like what an effect one bad Aphanomyces year can have on a field years in the future. So yeah, rotation. Yeah, definitely check my video out on YouTube. It's got the Gains4Grains hashtag if you're interested. And I unfortunately don't see Aphanomyces going anywhere anytime soon. I know lots of growers up here are looking at putting faba beans into their rotation. Of course, there's issues on the marketing side with that. Agronomically in the Northwest, they're a great fit. But yeah, marketing-wise, they're not always so easy to handle. So yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing here. And it really is just a function of the weather. Like that's kind of the biggest factor on determining how bad Aphanomyces will be in a given year is the pathogen there, and did it rain in June? So yeah.
I think in regards to varietal development within peas to have resistance to Aphanomyces, they are isolating a lot of genetics from France and trying those. And I feel like they're relatively close for peas to have a variety that can withstand that a little bit more than the traditional varieties currently on the market. Lentils are still a ways off, but I think they're getting fairly close with peas. The other thing that I've learned with the Aphanomyces is just making sure that you have that nice, healthy root system before, to ensure that, you know, maybe there is a chance that there could be some survival if it is a later season onset, is kind of something that I've seen to kind of reduce the severity in the field, and just making sure that you're not propagating that inoculum. But like what I said with the seed treatments, just making sure that you're trying to keep that inoculum as low as you can. Denise, I see there is a question as well on any idea where pea and lentil prices will be for new crop.
Thanks. That's always a good question. I mean, just like you guys, I don't have a crystal ball, so we're just looking at some indicators. What's really important to me right now when I'm assessing those new crop prices is what's your cost of production on the farm. We're probably in, I don't know where you're from, Leonard, but in some of my territories, we're seeing some really nice values. 8 1/4 new crop peas for yellows. 25-cent lentils. So taking a look at that and where's the profitability on that sale on your farm, and is it worth taking some risk off, or is it worth keeping some more upside? So that's kind of a case by case decision if it's a good value for your farm. Right now, I think it's the same for new crop pricing as I'm saying for old. I'm really interested to see what the next 6 weeks bring, and if we get some more strength coming on old crop. I think that does help bring the new crop prices along for the ride. Your acres are going to need to compete this spring to say, does every acre get sucked into canola because old crop pricing has been so strong? Or can these other crops stand in and hold the acre that they need to? The S&Ds for peas and lentils are both really tight, so they do need your acre.
Awesome. Thanks, Denise. I see Paul had his hand up. Paul, did you want to ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you great, Paul.
Yeah, so equal number of acres I'm seeding. So lentils, peas, canola, durum, and barley. What would be the ideal order in your mind?
For seeding them?
Yes.
Okay, so you have lentils, peas, canola, barley, and durum, you said?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So that is a tough one. I'd have to see. So in your area, traditionally, like how warm does the soil get and when do you start seeding?
We usually start seeding in late April, so April the 28th, 25th to the 28th. And it warms up pretty quick. Like by beginning of May, everybody in the area is seeding. So we're a couple hours north of Medicine Hat, so it's not quite in that southern Alberta district. But yeah, we prefer to get in early just to beat the heat.
Yeah. So it's hard to say because of your area. You're a lot further north than I am, but I like to actually seed canola relatively early. You have to watch your frost risk for that, but I do like to seed canola relatively early. And the other thing I like to do is I like to split up my durum. So I might start with some durum and then I might finish with some durum as well, just in case there's a risk of fusarium head blight. You'll have, yeah. Probably.
So any comment on rotation order too on those 4 or 5 species?
Yeah. So every field is receiving all 5 crops?
No. What I meant is there's,
Yeah.
for example, 4,000 acres of each being seeded. I'd like to find the ideal rotation.
Okay. So like the order of like, for example, year 1 will be this, year 2 will be this, and year 3 will be this, and for the 5 years?
Correct.
Okay. I'm just going to write it out in a minute. Just a second. I'll maybe just send you, if you want to just maybe put your email or something in the chat box, I can send you an email and we can talk about it.
Sure, that would be good. But that was pretty interesting, splitting up the durum. A little bit leery of seeding canola that early in this area here because of frost. I mean, the last couple of years we've had some frost, so that scares me a little. But that's very good information on splitting up the durum. Thank you for that.
I'm
yeah,
quite a bit
definitely that. Oh.
I was just going to say I'm quite a bit further north than you guys are, but up here it's very common practice for the pulses to go in first and the canola to go not before May 15th, just because we tend to see more flea beetle damage in my area. Again, quite a bit further north than you guys are, but it seems to me like every year all the canola seeded before May 15th in my area just gets chewed up like crazy by flea beetles, and the stuff that's seeded after doesn't seem to be nearly affected as badly. So that's 2 cents from up north for what it's worth.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing that up because I've heard that before. So what will be the theory in not having flea beetle pressures after May 15th seeding?
part of what I think is going on is that the crops up here anyway that are up before that, there's a few factors. First of all, the soil is a little bit cooler up here still, so they pop into that cotyledon stage and then just kind of sit there. And often, I mean, depending on what the soil moisture is doing too, that can affect it too. Sometimes we have some drier spring conditions, and so there just isn't enough moisture to get them going. Or the soil's a little bit cold, and they tend to, it slows down all the biological processes. So when they're sitting in that sort of cotyledon stage, they're very susceptible to flea beetle damage. The other thing that I think happens is that after May 15th, there's so much more canola that's up, around the country, that the flea beetles have a lot more, the damage is a lot more spread out amongst all the fields, as opposed to being focused on the first few fields that come up. It seems like the first few fields that come up, the flea beetles are really hungry and kind of get drawn to those fields. Whereas when there's, a bigger buffet, then each field gets a little bit more damage. That's what it seems like, in my opinion. That's what I think is going on.
Well, that's all very good information. Thank you very much.
All right, well, we're after 10 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for asking some questions. It makes it more interesting for Kira and I to speak to you that way, a little more interactive. Thanks, Katie, for helping us out with some of those northern perspectives on what's going on out in the fields. And we would encourage you guys, there is one more session like this tomorrow. It's going to be focused on oats and barley. So same place, same time. If you would want to register ahead of time, you will be entered for one more $250 daily draw. So that's always nice. Might get some coffee and a donut out of it. Again, if you have further questions for us, if you didn't catch our numbers or names prior, just speak to whoever invited you to this call and they'll pass you along. And if you're looking for some local expertise, they'll also know who in your area to connect you with. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully, if you're cleaning up after the storm, it's not too bad.